Today we'll be discussing a very interesting topic. But before we go into it, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever wondered why does it seem like every country of this world cannot do without each other when it comes to economy? Have you ever wondered why does country A have to depend on country B? Why is it that it seems that all of the countries of this world are interconnected? We would answer some of this question in this video. Let's dive right in. The world system economic theory. I know you must have heard that the world is a global village and the world is interconnected and interrelated. Now let's see how this relation, and let's see how come we have this global interdependence as a global nation. The world system theory was created by Immanuel Wallerstein in the year 1970. During the 1970s, there was a lot of change that was going on around the world, and several things was going on. And Immanuel Wallerstein at the time came up with the world system theory. This theory posits that the world is so connected rather, and that we operate a global economy, and a social dynamic relation happens when it comes to economy, to the end that every country of this world operates a single economy system. The root of this economy system is deeply rooted in the European expansion during the 16th century. During this century, we see that the European was trying to expand different parts of the world, hence causing an interrelation and interconnectedness of the various world economy. The theory and the thought of Immanuel Wallerstein is deeply rooted in the Marxist theory, and it focuses on global inequality, economic exploitation, and historical development. As we begin to look into this theory, you would see that the tenets of this theory is deeply rooted in what we refer to today as the capitalist, or the conflict theory. It posited that the world system actually interrelates, and that none of this economy of the world, regardless the country, regardless the stage of development that country is in, regardless of the state of that economy, that they cannot actually stand on their own. Rather, there is a dependence on one economy, where that they have so much economic power, they cannot stand on their own. They have to rely on countries with smaller economy. Also, countries with smaller economy, regardless of where they are, regardless of the stage and regardless of the state of their economy, also have to rely on countries with big or stable economic system. Now, it divided the countries of the world, all of the countries of the world, it divided them into 3 categories. It said some countries are referred to as core nations, some are referred to as peripheral countries, while the third country, it categorized them as peripheral countries. He explains that global economy inequality and dependency dynamic is what makes the world stable and what makes it go around. Now let's take a look at the 3 countries. the first one, which is the core countries. These countries are highly developed countries that belong to this core country are countries that are high, they have high economy system. There is the industrialization has gotten to the peak. They control capital, they have sophisticated technology and global trade. They engage in high skill, capital intensive production and benefit from most global economy exchanges. Now, these countries majorly no longer, or they operate in a high level of economy system. Their country and economy is so industrialized that they do not rely only on agriculture any longer. They have their service industry works perfectly well. There is an high level of dependence on technology. They have high sophisticated technology system. We have various examples of this country. We have the United States, we have Germany, we have Canada, we have many of these our European nations. They belong to this core country. They are very wealthy, and we know that most countries who have economic power also have political power, because okay, in another video I've made an explanation of how the how power works, so you could do well to watch this video to understand how power works. Now let's move on to the second countries. This is in this category we have what we refer to as the semi-peripheral countries. These semi-peripheral countries are countries that they are in between. They are neither poor, neither are they rich. They don't have as much sophistication, as much industrialization as the core country, but they have some level of industrialization. They exhibit characteristics of both the core countries and peripheral economies. They have some degree of dependency on the core nations. They depend on the core nations for their mainstay. They also exploit the lesser nation, which we refer to as the peripheral nation, while also they themselves are being exploited by the core nations. These semi-peripheral nations are in between. They exploit those at the base, which are those in the peripheral nations, while those core countries exploit them. The exploitation is in levels. So I guess that we understand what I'm talking about. And we have they practice mixed economy. They also have some level of industrialization which is higher than that of the peripheral nations. They use technology, but their technology is not as sophisticated. The level of their technology is not as sophisticated as that of the core nations. Also, their economy is booming, is not so bad, but not as that of the core country. And those in the core countries would exploit them. Why did they exploit those in the peripheral nations? Examples of countries like this: we have Brazil, we have Mexico, and the likes. Now let's look at I put China here, but the world has moved on. I don't think China now belongs to semi-peripheral nation. They've moved from where they used to be. They are now competing with the US, so China cannot fit into the example or what we call the semi-peripheral nation. Let's look at the peripheral nations. These nations are underdeveloped. They are the countries that we refer to as underdeveloped country or developing nations, and they provide cheap labor. What they have basically, and one thing that they depend largely on is labor. They have a lot of labor that they can provide. They have raw material. They also have agricultural products that they also have agricultural products, and their economy somehow still relies on agricultural activities. Now, they experience high level of economic dependency, and they have weak industrial sector. One of the characteristics of peripheral nation is that their industry is still very, very weak. It's not as standard as it should be. Also, they have political instability. In countries that are referred to as peripheral nations, they are very, very stable when it comes to politics, and the reason is because their economic power is not as strong as it should be. They provide cheap labors. Both the core countries and the semi-peripheral countries exploit them as much as they can because they depend on them. They move some of their raw products or raw materials to core countries and semi-peripheral countries, and when these products are finished, they then send them back. They sell back to this country who give them raw materials at a very high cost. So let me make a vivid example. For instance, in Nigeria, we have crude oil, right? So at some point we used to we would export our crude oil to countries who can refine them and make them into finished good. We know that the narrative is gradually changing in Nigeria these days, but as it used to be formerly, we then send this our crude oil to core countries, to countries who would refine them. After these countries refine them, we are selling to them at a rate that is cheap. When these countries, when they refine them and they turn them into finished goods, then they sell back to us in Nigeria. They sell to us at a very high rate, even though we are the owner of the raw material. So when these things get back to Nigeria, even though we are the sole owner of the raw material, we still would not get it as cheap as we should get it, because we are buying the finished goods from other countries. I guess that example drives it home and helps us understand what I'm referring to. So this peripheral country, even though they have all of the resources that they need, they don't have, because their industry is not as sophisticated as that of the core nations. It leads them to depending on core countries for finished good, which leads to the cost of goods becoming high when it is finished and brought back into the country. And examples of such countries, we know that we have African nations, most of African nations, and then we have some parts of Latin American, we have South Asia, and the list goes on. Now let's move on. Let us look at the historical context and development. And I've made mention of that in the beginning of this video, that this theory was largely originated during the 16th century when the European nations were expanding and colonizing other countries of the world, and that industrialization is like the core. Industrialization is the base. Industrialization is the base of what of how the dynamism of how this nation works. Also, capitalism, in my explanation, you should already know that capitalism is the order of the day. Capitalism is every country wants to exploit other country and make sure that they can make as much profit that they can from the other, and this will definitely lead to economic dependence and persistent global inequality. Now, let's look at how, I don't need to waste time any longer telling you how capitalist expansion and exploitation goes on in these three nations of the world. We see that there is usually an unequal exchange. The core countries get raw materials and cheap labor from semi-peripheral nations and peripheral nations, and then when they are sending back the finished good, what they get in return is finished good. Those who they got the raw material from would not even get it at the rate in which they send raw material to them. It becomes more expensive, and because peripheral nations and semi-peripheral nations they don't have enough industrialization to help them finish their goods, so they have to depend on the economy of core nations. Now let's look at the strengths and the critiques of some of this theory. One of its strengths is that it provides historical and global perspective on how economic development work, and also highlights inequalities and colonial impact on the economy of the world. But one of the critiques is that it overemphasizes economic factors, and it ignores cultural influence. Don't forget that every culture, every nation of the world has a cultural undertone which influence how activity is being run, and not just economic factors alone. And it also assumes upward mobility within the system. It assumes that once an economy is going up, it cannot come down, and it forgets that economy can be good today and there can be a downward mobility and an upward mobility. Wallerstein forgot to pull that into consideration while discussing this theory. Now I have an assignment for you. I want you to provide examples of how core nations influence peripheral nations. I want you to give me a practical example. Give me examples of nations that are in core country, an example of nations that are in peripheral nations, and then explain in details this and this is how the economy of this core nation affects that of the peripheral nation. I want you to make a vivid illustration of it, and while you are explaining, explain to me how the dynamic can change the solution. Give me solution to these issues that you've stated. Also suggest ways this economy can reduce dependency on core economies. Then you submit to my mail olasumba03@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and to subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye for now.